The train lurched to a stop with a screech of metal on metal that jolted Lydia Thompson from her anxious thoughts. And when she peered through the dusty window expecting to see the sprawling streets of Virginia City, Nevada, all she found was a collection of ramshackle buildings that looked barely deserving of the word settlement. She pressed her gloved hand against the glass, her breath fogging the pain as she counted maybe a dozen structures total, most of them sun-bleached and weather-worn in a way that spoke of harsh winters and harsher summers. This could not possibly be Virginia City. The conductor had described it as a thriving mining town with nearly 15,000 residents, a place where a mail-order bride might find some semblance of civilization, even in the wilds of Nevada territory. This place looked like it could barely support 50 souls. "Excuse me," Lydia called out as the conductor passed her seat, his brass buttons catching the afternoon light that streamed through the windows. "I believe there has been some mistake. This is not Virginia City, is it?" The conductor, a weathered man with salt and pepper hair tucked beneath his cap, consulted his pocket watch before answering. "No, miss. This here is Dry Creek, Nevada. We have a brief stop for water and coal. Virginia City is another hour north." Relief flooded through her, sweet and sudden. She settled back into her seat, smoothing the wrinkles from her traveling dress, a dove-gray cotton that had seemed so practical when she had packed her trunk in Boston 3 weeks ago. Everything she owned fit into that trunk now resting in the baggage car, her entire life condensed to one battered leather case with brass corners. The year was 1875. And Lydia Thompson, at 23 years old, was traveling west to marry a man she had never met. Theodore Whitmore had placed an advertisement in the Boston papers seeking a wife, describing himself as a successful mine owner in need of a refined woman to manage his household. His letters had been polite, even charming in their way, filled with descriptions of Nevada's stark beauty and promises of a comfortable life. Lydia had written back not out of romantic fancy, but out of necessity. Her father's death had left her alone and nearly penniless, her options limited to either accepting a marriage proposal from her father's business partner, a man of 60 with wandering hands and whiskey breath, or taking a chance on the unknown. She had chosen the unknown. 15-minute stop, folks," the conductor announced. "You are welcome to stretch your legs, but do not wander far. The train will not wait for stragglers." Lydia considered remaining in her seat, but after 3 days of travel with only brief respites, the thought of standing on solid ground proved too tempting. She gathered her reticule and made her way down the narrow aisle, her traveling boots clicking against the wooden floor of the passenger car. The heat struck her immediately as she descended the metal steps, a dry, intense warmth utterly unlike the humid summers of Boston. The air smelled of dust and sage, and somewhere nearby, she could hear the rhythmic clanging of metal on metal from what must have been a blacksmith's forge. The train platform, if it could be called that, was little more than a stretch of packed earth beside the rails. A wooden sign proclaimed this to be Dry Creek, population unlisted, established 1868. Beyond the platform, the town stretched out in a haphazard arrangement, buildings that looked like they had been placed wherever convenient rather than according to any sensible plan. A man stood near the edge of the platform, tall and lean in the way of someone who had never known softness or ease. He wore dusty boots, worn denim pants, and a shirt that might once have been blue but had faded to something closer to gray. A hat shadowed his face, but Lydia could see he was watching the train with an expression she could not quite read. She turned away, focusing instead on the simple pleasure of moving her legs, pacing the length of the platform while other passengers milled about. A woman with 2 small children hurried toward the general store, An older gentleman lit a pipe and stood smoking in the shade of the water tower. "You are Lydia Thompson," a voice said behind her. She spun around to find the tall cowboy standing closer than she had realized. And now that she could see his face clearly, she noticed he was younger than she had first assumed, perhaps 27 or 28. His features were sun-bronzed and angular, with deep-set eyes the color of creek water after rain, somewhere between green and gray. Those eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to step back. "I am," she said carefully. "Have we been introduced?" He removed his hat, revealing hair the color of dark honey, slightly too long and pushed back from his forehead. "No, madam. My name is Ethan Nelson. I raise cattle about 5 miles from here. I received a telegram yesterday from Theodore Whitmore." The relief she had felt moments ago evaporated instantly. Something in his tone, something in the way he would not quite meet her eyes, told her that whatever he had to say would not be welcome news. "A telegram," she repeated slowly. "From my intended." "Yes, madam." Ethan Nelson shifted his weight, hat clutched in both hands. "I am afraid there is no easy way to tell you this. Theodore Whitmore passed away 2 days ago. Mine collapsed up in Virginia City. He and 3 other men were killed instantly." The words seemed to come from very far away, filtering through layers of shock and disbelief. Lydia heard them, understood their meaning on some level, but could not quite make them real. She had been prepared for many things during this journey. She had steeled herself for the possibility that Theodore Whitmore might be less appealing in person than he had seemed in his letters, that his mind might be less prosperous than advertised, that Nevada might prove too harsh and unforgiving for someone raised in Boston's relative comfort. She had not prepared herself for him to be dead. "I see," she heard herself say, her voice remarkably steady. "Thank you for delivering this news in person, Mr. Nelson. I suppose I should retrieve my trunk and return to Boston on the next available train." Even as she spoke, her mind raced ahead to the practicalities. She had exactly $17 remaining from the money she had saved for this journey. Would that be enough for passage back to Massachusetts? And if she did return, what then? Her father's business partner would still be waiting, still expecting her to accept his proposal now that she had no other prospects. "About that," Ethan Nelson said. "Whitmore, he put some provisions in his will, apparently. Had it drawn up right before he sent for you, which shows he was thinking ahead at least. He left instructions that if anything happened to him before you arrived, you were to be compensated for your travel expenses and given funds to return home or establish yourself elsewhere, whichever you preferred." "That is very generous," Lydia said numbly. "There is one complication, though." Ethan Nelson shifted again, clearly uncomfortable. "The will is being held by a lawyer in Carson City, which is about 30 miles south of here. Getting there and sorting out the legal matters will take a few days at minimum. Whitmore's estate is tied up in probate, and the mines have all been shut down pending investigation of the collapse. Carson City." She turned the name over in her mind, trying to remember if Theodore had mentioned it in any of his letters. "I understand. I suppose I will need to find lodging while these matters are settled. Is there a hotel in Dry Creek?" For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across Ethan Nelson's face. "No, madam. We have got a saloon that rents rooms, but I would not recommend them to a lady. Dry Creek is not much of a town, truth be told. Most folks here are either passing through or too stubborn to admit they should move somewhere with better prospects." "Then what do you suggest, Mr. Nelson?" The train whistle blew, a long, piercing note that made her jump. The conductor appeared on the platform, calling for passengers to board. "I suggest you stay anyway," Ethan Nelson said quickly, the words tumbling out as if he had been holding them back and could not contain them any longer. "Not here in Dry Creek specifically, but out at my ranch. I have got a spare room that my sister used before she married and moved to California. It is not fancy, but it is clean and respectable. You could stay there while we sort out the legal business with Whitmore's estate. My ranch hand's wife, Maria, lives on the property too. She could serve as chaperone so folks would not talk." Lydia stared at him, trying to process this unexpected offer. The train whistle blew again, more insistent this time. "Miss, you boarding or not?" the conductor called out. Every instinct told her to get back on that train, to leave Nevada and its dead fiancés and strange cowboys behind. But where would she go? Back to Boston and a marriage that made her skin crawl, forward to Virginia City and legal entanglements that might take weeks to resolve. At least Ethan Nelson was offering her time to think, to plan, to figure out what came next. "I accept your offer, Mr. Nelson," she said, making the decision even as doubt clouded her mind. "Though I confess I am not entirely certain why you would extend such kindness to a stranger." He settled his hat back on his head, and she thought she saw relief in his expression. "Theodore Whitmore was a friend of mine. We worked together on water rights issues between the ranchers and the mining operations. He was a good man, and he was excited about you coming. Seemed only right to make sure you were taken care of, seeing as you came all this way based on his promises." The train began to move, slowly at first, then gathering speed. Lydia watched it pull away, taking with it her last easy avenue of escape. For better or worse, she had committed herself to staying in this dusty Nevada town with a cowboy she had known for all of 10 minutes. "My trunk," she said suddenly. "All my belongings are in the baggage car." "Already taken care of," Ethan Nelson said, pointing to where a young man was unloading a familiar battered leather trunk onto a wooden cart. "I sent word ahead to have it pulled off when the train stopped. You were very certain I would accept your offer." "No, madam. I was very hopeful you would not have to continue on to Virginia City alone, given the circumstances. If you had gotten back on that train, I would have had your trunk sent on to Carson City in care of the lawyer handling the estate. Either way, I figured you would need it nearby." His thoughtfulness surprised her, though she was not sure why it should. Just because her experience of men had been largely disappointing did not mean they were all scoundrels and opportunists. Theodore Whitmore had seemed decent in his letters, and he had thought well enough of Ethan Nelson to trust him with news of his death and the care of his mail-order bride. Former mail-order bride, she corrected herself. She was not anyone's bride now. Just a woman stranded far from home with uncertain prospects and dwindling funds. "Come on," Ethan Nelson said, gesturing toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy-looking horses. "Ranch is about an hour's drive. We can get you settled before nightfall, and Maria will have supper ready. She is a fine cook. You must be hungry after days of train food." She was, in fact, ravenous, though she had been too nervous to acknowledge it until he mentioned food. The last meal she had eaten had been a dry sandwich purchased at a depot somewhere in Wyoming, and before that, an apple and some cheese she had packed in her reticule. The young man who had retrieved her trunk loaded it into the back of the wagon with practiced efficiency. Ethan Nelson helped her up onto the bench seat, his grip firm but impersonal, and then climbed up beside her. He took up the reins with easy confidence, clicking his tongue to set the horses in motion. They left Dry Creek behind in a matter of minutes, such as it was. The landscape opened up around them, vast and empty in a way that made Lydia's chest tighten with something between awe and fear. She had known the West would be different from Boston, but knowing and experiencing were entirely separate things. Here there were no buildings crowding together, no cobblestone streets or church spires or tree-lined parks, just earth and sky and the endless rolling hills dotted with sage and scrub brush. "First time out west?" Ethan Nelson asked, his eyes on the road ahead. "Yes. I have never been farther than New York before this journey. It takes some getting used to the space. Some folks find it lonely, others find it freeing. Which do you find it?" He considered this for a moment, the reins loose in his capable hands. "Both, I suppose. I grew up in Missouri, came out here after the war. Thought I wanted to be somewhere nobody knew me, somewhere I could start fresh. Found that space out here, but found the loneliness too. Built the ranch thinking I would need help eventually, built it bigger than one man required. Then just kept working it alone anyway, telling myself I would find the right person to share it with someday." There was something almost wistful in his voice, and Lydia found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed slightly against the sun. He was handsome in a rugged way that would have seemed out of place in Boston's drawing rooms but fit perfectly here against the backdrop of sage and sky. "You said your sister lived with you before she married, Clara. She came out 3 years ago when her husband passed. Cholera outbreak in Kansas City. She stayed with me while she got her bearings again, then met a merchant passing through on his way to Sacramento. They corresponded for 6 months before he came back to ask her to marry him proper. She moved to California last spring. You must miss her." "I do. But she is happy, and that matters more. She writes regular, tells me about the orange trees they have planted and the grandchildren my mother keeps asking about." He smiled slightly. "Clara always says if I am waiting for the perfect woman to wander into Dry Creek, I will be waiting a long time. Yet here I am, wandering into Dry Creek. That you are, Miss Thompson, though under circumstances neither of us would have chosen." They fell into companionable silence after that. The only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels, the steady clip-clop of the horse's hooves, and the occasional call of a bird she could not identify. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. After perhaps 40 minutes of travel, Ethan Nelson pointed ahead to where a cluster of buildings emerged from the landscape. "That is the ranch there. Not much to look at, but it is solid and paid for, which is more than a lot of folks can say." As they drew closer, Lydia could make out details. A house, single-story but sprawling, built of wood that had weathered to a soft gray. A barn, red paint fading but structure sound. A bunkhouse, several corrals, a chicken coop, and various outbuildings whose purposes she could not immediately identify. It was rough compared to the orderly estates around Boston, but there was something appealing about it too, something honest in the way it sat unpretentiously in the landscape. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 35, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and a face that spoke of both warmth and no-nonsense practicality. "That is Maria," Ethan Nelson said. "She and her husband, Miguel, have worked for me for 4 years now. Miguel manages the cattle, and Maria keeps the house from falling into complete chaos." Maria raised a hand in greeting as Ethan Nelson pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "You found her then," she called out, her accent adding a melodic quality to the words. "Welcome, Miss Thompson. I am very sorry about Mr. Whitmore. Ethan told me what happened." "Thank you," Lydia said as Ethan Nelson helped her down from the wagon. Her legs felt unsteady after the long ride, and she was grateful for his supporting hand. "It is very kind of you to accommodate me on such short notice." "Not at all. It will be nice to have another woman around the place. I have been outnumbered by men for too long." Maria smiled, and Lydia felt some of her tension ease. Come inside. I have your room ready and supper will be on the table within the hour. You must be exhausted from your travels." Miguel appeared to help with the trunk, a stocky man with kind eyes and a ready smile. He and Ethan Nelson carried it inside while Maria led Lydia through the front door and into the house. The interior was sparse but clean, with simple furniture that looked handmade and sturdy. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace dominating one wall and a table that could seat 8 or 10 people comfortably. Doors led off to what Lydia assumed were bedrooms. "This was Clara's room," Maria said, pushing open a door to reveal a small but pleasant space with a window overlooking the corrals. A bed with a quilt in shades of blue and cream took up most of the room, but there was also a dresser, a chair, and a small table with a basin and pitcher for washing. "Simple but comfortable. Will it suit?" "It is perfect," Lydia said honestly. After 3 nights of sleeping sitting up in a train car, the bed looked like heaven. "I will leave you to freshen up then. Supper at 6. Alone in the room, Lydia sank onto the bed and let herself feel the full weight of everything that had happened in the past few hours. She had disembarked from that train expecting to be met by her future husband, a man she had never seen but whose letters had promised stability and security. Instead, she had been met by a stranger telling her that future husband was dead, and she had agreed to stay at a ranch in the middle of nowhere with people she did not know. It was possibly the most foolish decision she had ever made. It was also, she realized, the first decision in a very long time that had been entirely her own. Not her father's, not society's expectations, not desperation or duty. Her own choice. She stood and went to the window, looking out over the ranch as the sun continued its descent. Ethan Nelson was in one of the corrals, tending to the horses that had pulled the wagon. Even from this distance, she could see the easy competence in his movements, the way he handled the animals with a gentleness that contrasted with his weathered appearance. A knock at the door pulled her from her observations. "Yes, it is just me," Maria called. "I brought you some water for washing. The basin is only so big, but it is fresh from the well and cool." Lydia opened the door to find Maria carrying a pitcher of water. "Thank you. That is very thoughtful." Maria poured the water into the basin, then paused, studying Lydia with an expression that was not unkind but definitely assessing. "I know this must all seem very strange to you, being in a place like this with people you do not know, but Ethan is a good man. One of the best I have ever known. Whatever his reasons for bringing you here, they are honest ones. You do not need to be afraid." "I am not afraid," Lydia said and realized it was true. Uncertain, yes. Overwhelmed, absolutely, but not afraid. "Mr. Nelson has been nothing but courteous." "He is sweet on you already, I think," Maria said with a knowing smile. "I saw the way he looked at you when he helped you down from the wagon. We only just met a few hours ago. Sometimes that is all it takes. Miguel knew he wanted to marry me the day we met. It took me a bit longer to come around, but he was persistent." Maria moved toward the door. "I will let you rest before supper, but if you need anything at all, you just call out." After Maria left, Lydia washed the dust of travel from her face and hands, then unpinned her hair and brushed it out before pinning it back up in a simpler style than she had worn on the train. She changed from her traveling dress into something fresher, though still practical, a dark green cotton with minimal ornamentation. When she emerged from the room, she found the table set for 4, and the smell of cooking meat and fresh bread filled the air. Her stomach growled audibly. "Perfect timing," Maria said from where she stood at the stove. "Miguel and Ethan will be in shortly. They are just finishing the evening feeding." "Is there anything I can do to help?" "Not tonight. Tonight you are a guest, but if you stay on a while, I will put you to work soon enough." There is always more to do than hours in the day on a ranch. The men arrived a few minutes later, stomping dust from their boots on the porch before entering. Ethan Nelson had washed up as well, his hair damp and pushed back from his forehead. His shirt changed to a clean one that brought out the gray-green of his eyes. They sat down to a meal of beef stew, fresh bread and beans, with dried apple pie for dessert. The food was simple but delicious, and Lydia found herself eating with more appetite than she had shown in weeks. The conversation flowed easily, with Miguel and Maria telling stories about life on the ranch and asking Lydia polite questions about Boston and her journey west. Ethan Nelson said little but seemed content to listen, occasionally adding a comment or asking a question that showed he was paying attention. Lydia found herself increasingly aware of his presence, the way his hands moved when he spoke, the rare but genuine quality of his smile. After supper, Miguel and Maria excused themselves to their quarters in the bunkhouse, leaving Ethan and Lydia alone. He poured coffee for both of them, and they sat at the table while the last light faded from the windows. "I should explain about the legal situation with Whitmore's estate," Ethan said, cradling his coffee cup in both hands. "I sent a telegram to the lawyer in Carson City this morning, letting him know you had arrived and explaining the situation. He sent back saying you should come to his office at your earliest convenience to review the will and make arrangements. I can take you there tomorrow if you feel up to it, or we can wait a few days if you need time to recover from your journey." "Tomorrow would be fine," Lydia said. "The sooner these matters are settled, the sooner I can determine what comes next." "What do you think will come next, if you do not mind my asking?" She stared into her coffee, watching the steam rise in lazy spirals. "I honestly do not know. I have no family left in Boston, no close friends who would take me in long term. I have some skills. I can read and write and do figures. I can sew and cook passably well. Perhaps I could find work as a teacher or a seamstress somewhere." "You could stay here," Ethan Nelson said quietly. "I mean, not just for a few days while the legal matters are sorted. You could stay on, make a life here if you wanted. I know it is not what you planned, and Dry Creek is not exactly a thriving metropolis, but there are opportunities if you know where to look." "That is a generous offer, Mr. Nelson, but I could not impose on your hospitality indefinitely. It would not be an imposition." He set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly, his eyes serious. "I am going to be honest with you, Miss Thompson, because I do not see the point in dancing around things. I am 28 years old, and I have been working this ranch alone for going on 6 years now. It is a good spread, profitable enough to support a family comfortably. But it is lonely work, and I have been thinking for a while now that it is time I found someone to share it with. Someone who wants more than just the ranch, but sees it as a foundation for building something bigger." Lydia's heart began to beat faster. "Mr. Nelson, are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting you stay and give this place a chance. Give me a chance. I am not asking you to marry me right this minute. I am not foolish enough to think we know each other well enough for that, but I am asking you to consider the possibility. Stay through the summer. Get to know me and the ranch and the area. If at the end of that time you decide this life is not for you, I will personally see you settled wherever you want to go with enough money to get started. But if you find you like it here, if you find you could see a future in Nevada, then we could talk about making that future together." It was perhaps the most extraordinary proposal Lydia had ever heard, and technically it was not even a proposal, just an invitation to consider the possibility of one. She should refuse. She should thank him politely and explain that she could not possibly make such a decision based on a few hours' acquaintance. But looking at Ethan Nelson's earnest face, at the hope and vulnerability in his eyes, She found herself hesitating. What did she have to return to? A city where she knew no one, where her prospects were limited to work that would barely keep her fed and clothed. Here was a man offering her time and space to find her footing, asking nothing in return except that she keep an open mind. It was more than anyone else had offered her in a very long time. "I will stay through the summer," she heard herself say. "Not as an acceptance of anything more than your hospitality, but as a chance to determine what I want my life to look like. Is that agreeable?" The smile that broke across Ethan Nelson's face was like sunrise, transforming his features from merely handsome to something approaching beautiful. "That is more than agreeable, Miss Thompson. That is perfect." They talked for another hour, discussing practical matters like her role on the ranch and what she might do to occupy her time. Ethan suggested she might help Maria with the household work if she wanted, or she could try her hand at other tasks like tending the kitchen garden or even learning to ride. The possibilities seemed endless, and for the first time in months, Lydia felt something stirring in her chest that might have been hope. When she finally retired to her room, exhausted but strangely energized, she stood at the window for a long time looking out at the star-filled sky. In Boston, the stars had been dim, obscured by city lights and smoke. Here they blazed with an intensity that took her breath away, thousands upon thousands of points of light scattered across the darkness like diamonds on velvet. She had come west to marry a stranger and build a new life. That stranger was dead, but the possibility of a new life remained. Whatever happened next, she was determined to meet it on her own terms. The journey to Carson City the next day took most of the morning, with Ethan and Lydia setting out just after dawn in the wagon. The landscape between Dry Creek and the territorial capital was stunning in the early light, all golden hills and deep blue sky. Ethan pointed out landmarks as they traveled, explaining the history of the area and the challenges of ranching in such arid country. Carson City, when they reached it, proved to be a proper town with paved streets, brick buildings, and all the hallmarks of civilization. After days in the wilderness, the bustle of activity felt almost overwhelming to Lydia. People crowded the sidewalks, horses and wagons filled the streets, and the sound of construction echoed from multiple sites where new buildings were going up. The lawyer's office was in a building near the center of town, above a dry goods store. Ethan escorted Lydia up the narrow stairs and into a waiting room where a clerk took their names and ushered them into an inner office. The lawyer, a Mr. Harrison, was a portly man with spectacles and an air of professional sympathy. He expressed his condolences for Theodore Whitmore's death and explained that the estate was indeed in probate, but that certain provisions had been made specifically for Lydia. "Mr. Whitmore was very clear in his instructions," Harrison said, shuffling through papers on his desk. "In the event of his death prior to your marriage, you were to receive compensation for your travel expenses, a sum of $500 to establish yourself wherever you chose, and first right to purchase his house in Virginia City at a fair price should you wish to remain in Nevada." $500. It was more money than Lydia had ever possessed at one time, enough to return to Boston and live modestly for nearly a year while she sought employment, enough to travel to California or Oregon and start completely fresh, enough to provide her with choices, real choices, for the first time in her adult life. "That is extraordinarily generous," she managed. "Theodore Whitmore was a good man," Harrison said. "He felt responsible for bringing you all this way based on promises he might not be able to keep. The mine business is dangerous, and he knew the risks. He wanted to ensure you would not be left destitute if something happened to him." They spent another hour going over paperwork, with Lydia signing documents and Harrison explaining various legal technicalities. The money would be available to her within the week, once certain formalities were completed. The house in Virginia City was currently being held by the estate, but could be viewed at her convenience if she was interested. When they finally emerged from the lawyer's office, the sun was high overhead and Lydia's head was spinning with information and possibilities. "How are you holding up?" Ethan asked, offering his arm as they navigated the crowded sidewalk. "I hardly know," Lydia admitted. "I expected to be left with nothing, and instead I find I have more resources than I have had in years. It feels strange, like this is all happening to someone else. Whitmore did right by you. I am glad for that, even though the circumstances are tragic." Ethan guided her toward a restaurant with a hand-painted sign advertising home cooking. "Let us get some lunch, and then we can head back to the ranch. Unless you want to stay in Carson City for a while, see more of the town." "No, I think I have had enough of town for one day." The ranch sounds perfect. Over lunch, they talked more easily than they had the day before, the initial awkwardness of strangers beginning to fade. Ethan told her about his experiences in the war, how he had been barely 18 when he enlisted, full of ideas about glory and honor, and how those ideas had been stripped away by the brutal reality of battle. He spoke of coming west afterward, unable to settle back into his old life in Missouri, needing space and silence to process what he had seen and done. Lydia, in turn, told him about her childhood in Boston, about her father who had been a clerk in a shipping office, hardworking but never quite able to get ahead. She told him about the long months nursing her father through his final illness, watching him waste away while the bills piled up and her savings dwindled to nothing. She did not mention her father's business partner and his unwanted proposal, but something in Ethan's expression suggested he understood there was more to her story than she was saying. "You have had a rough time of it," he said quietly. "But you are here now, and things can be different if you want them to be. The West is full of people reinventing themselves, starting over. No reason you cannot do the same. Is that what you did? Reinvent yourself? Still working on it, to be honest. Some days I think I have left the war behind, and other days it feels like it is right there beside me still. But the ranch helps. Working with the cattle, building something with my own hands, it gives me purpose. Makes me feel like I am contributing something positive to the world instead of just destroying things." There was such raw honesty in his words that Lydia found herself reaching across the table to touch his hand. "You seem like a very good man, Ethan Nelson. Theodore Whitmore was lucky to have you as a friend." His hand turned under hers, his fingers curling gently around her own. "I am the lucky one, Miss Thompson. Lucky that you decided to stay, even for a little while. Lucky to have the chance to know you." They sat like that for a moment, hands linked across the table before Lydia gently withdrew, suddenly aware of the other diners around them. But the warmth of his touch stayed with her, and she found herself stealing glances at him as they finished their meal and made their way back to the wagon. The ride back to Dry Creek was quieter than the journey to Carson City, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes when two people are at ease in each other's company. Lydia watched the landscape roll by and thought about the choices before her. She could take her $500 and leave, start over somewhere else entirely. Or she could stay and see what might develop between her and this thoughtful cowboy who had opened his home to a stranger in need. When they reached the ranch, Maria was waiting with fresh bread and preserves for a late afternoon snack. Miguel was in the corrals working with a young horse, and Ethan excused himself to help, leaving Lydia and Maria alone in the kitchen. "So," Maria said, pouring tea for both of them, How did it go in Carson City? Better than I expected. Theodore Whitmore was very generous in his provisions for me. That is good. You deserve something good after coming all this way. Maria studied her over the rim of her teacup. And what did you think of our Ethan on the long drive? Lydia felt heat rising in her cheeks. He was very pleasant company, easy to talk to. He likes you, I can tell. He has not looked at a woman the way he looked at you in all the time I have known him. We have only just met. Sometimes that is enough. Miguel and I knew right away, like I told you. Some people, they just fit together from the start. Maria set down her cup and leaned forward conspiratorially. I am going to tell you something, and you can take it or leave it as you choose. Ethan Nelson has been alone too long. He is the kind of man who needs someone to care for, someone to build a life with. He has been waiting for the right woman to come along, but out here there are not many opportunities to meet anyone. When he heard about Theodore sending for a mail-order bride, he told Miguel he wished he had thought of it himself. Then, when Theodore died and you were coming anyway, I think Ethan saw it as fate giving him a chance he would not have had otherwise. So he brought me here hoping I would agree to marry him. Lydia felt a flutter of something between alarm and excitement. He brought you here hoping you would give him a chance to prove himself worthy of you. There is a difference. Ethan would never pressure you or expect something you were not willing to give. But he is hoping, yes. And I think you would be good for each other if you gave it a chance. Before Lydia could respond, the door opened and Ethan entered, bringing with him the smell of horses and hay. That colt is coming along nicely, he said to Maria. Another few weeks and he will be ready to sell. Good, we could use the money with winter coming. Maria stood and gathered the tea things. I am going to start supper. Lydia, would you like to help? Or are you still tired from the journey? I would be happy to help, Lydia said, grateful for something to do with her hands. They fell into an easy rhythm in the kitchen, with Maria directing and Lydia following instructions. Ethan disappeared to take care of other ranch chores, and by the time he and Miguel returned for supper, the table was laden with fried chicken, potatoes, greens from the garden, and a berry cobbler Maria had made from preserves. After supper became a pattern over the following days. Lydia would help Maria with the cooking and cleaning, learning the rhythms of ranch life. In the mornings, she would work in the kitchen garden, weeding and watering and harvesting whatever was ready. In the afternoons, she would sit on the porch with mending or reading one of the books from Ethan's small collection, watching the men work the cattle in the distance. Ethan was patient and kind, never pushing but always making it clear through small gestures that his interest in her was genuine. He would bring her wildflowers he found while riding fence lines. He would sit with her in the evenings and tell her stories about the land and the animals. He would ask her opinion on ranch decisions, treating her thoughts as valuable even though she knew nothing about cattle or horses. 2 weeks after her arrival, Ethan asked if she would like to learn to ride. Lydia had never been on a horse in her life, but the idea appealed to her sense of adventure. We will start slow, Ethan promised, leading a gentle mare named Daisy from the barn. This old girl is patient as they come. She used to be Clara's horse before Clara moved to California. He showed Lydia how to approach the horse, how to let Daisy smell her hand and get comfortable with her presence. Then he demonstrated how to put her foot in the stirrup and swing into the saddle, making it look effortless. When it was Lydia's turn, she found it considerably more challenging. Her skirts tangled in the stirrup, and she nearly lost her balance trying to swing her leg over the saddle. Ethan steadied her with a hand on her waist, his touch firm and reassuring. Easy now. There is no rush. Daisy will wait all day if she needs to. On the third try, Lydia managed to get into the saddle, though with considerably less grace than Ethan had shown. The ground looked very far away suddenly, and she gripped the saddle horn with both hands. "Good," Ethan said, adjusting her feet in the stirrups. "Now just sit for a minute and get used to the feel of it. Daisy is not going anywhere until I tell her to." Gradually, Lydia's death grip on the saddle horn relaxed. She could feel the warmth of the horse beneath her, the gentle rise and fall of Daisy's breathing. It was not as terrifying as she had initially thought. "Ready to try walking?" Ethan asked. "I think so." He made a clicking sound with his tongue, and Daisy began to walk slowly around the corral, with Ethan walking beside them, one hand on the reins. Lydia focused on staying balanced, on moving with the horse's motion rather than fighting it. After several circuits of the corral, Ethan stopped Daisy and looked up at Lydia with a smile that made her heart skip. "You are a natural. How does it feel?" "Terrifying and wonderful at the same time." "That is how the best things in life feel, I think." She wondered if he was still talking about riding. They continued the lessons every afternoon, and within a week, Lydia was confident enough to ride Daisy around the ranch property with Ethan beside her on his own horse, a tall gelding named Ranger. He showed her the boundaries of his land, pointing out the creek that gave the nearby town its name, the best grazing areas, the places where he wanted to eventually build additional corrals and maybe even a second barn. "You talk about the future of this place like it is already real," Lydia observed as they paused on a rise overlooking the ranch house. "It is real in my mind, has been for years, just waiting for the right time and the right circumstances to make it happen." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. The right person to share it with, Ethan. She was not sure what she wanted to say, how to articulate the confusion of feelings swirling inside her. "I know it is too soon," he said quickly. "I know you need time. I am just telling you what I am thinking, what I am hoping for. I want you to know where I stand so you can make your decisions with all the information. I appreciate your honesty. I do. It is just that I came here expecting one future, and that future disappeared before I could even begin it. Now you are offering me a different future, and it is wonderful and tempting, but I am afraid of making another mistake, of rushing into something without thinking it through." "Then do not rush. Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere, and neither is the ranch." He smiled softly. "Though I will say, for what it is worth, I do not think you could be a mistake, Lydia Thompson. I think you might be the best thing that has ever wandered into my life." The way he said her name with such warmth and certainty made something in her chest tighten. She had known him only a few weeks, but already she could not imagine her days without his steady presence, his quiet strength, his unexpected moments of humor. "You might be the best thing that has wandered into my life too," she admitted, "which terrifies me more than you can imagine." "Why terrifying?" "Because if I let myself believe in this in us, and it does not work out, I am not sure I could bear it." Ethan reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "Life does not come with guarantees, Lydia. All we can do is decide what we are willing to risk for the possibility of happiness. I am willing to risk my heart on you. The question is whether you are willing to risk yours on me." She looked at their joined hands, his calloused and work-roughened, hers smaller and softer. They fit together well, she thought. Different but complementary. "I am starting to think I might be," she said quietly. His answering smile was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. As summer progressed, Lydia found herself settling into ranch life with an ease that surprised her. She learned to milk the cow, to churn butter, to identify which chickens were the best layers. She helped Maria preserve vegetables from the garden and make jam from wild berries Miguel gathered. She improved her riding until she could join Ethan on longer excursions across his land, sometimes packing a lunch and spending the whole afternoon exploring. On one such excursion, they rode to a spot Ethan called the high pasture, where a natural spring fed a small pool surrounded by cottonwood trees. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way, and Lydia could see why Ethan loved it. They ate their lunch sitting on a flat rock beside the pool, sharing bread and cheese and apples while the horses grazed nearby. The afternoon was hot but pleasant in the shade of the trees, and Lydia found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did, letting her guard down completely. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said, finishing his apple and tossing the core into the brush for the wildlife. "Of course. What made you decide to become a mail-order bride in the first place? You are educated, well-spoken, pretty. Seems like you would have had other options in Boston." Lydia had known this question would come eventually. She had avoided talking about it in detail, but she owed Ethan the truth if they were going to build something real together. "My father's business partner proposed to me after my father died," she said, staring into the clear water of the pool. "He was 60 years old, a widower with grown children. He offered to pay off my father's debts and support me if I married him. When I refused, he made it clear he would ensure I could not find respectable work anywhere in Boston. He had connections, influence. He meant it as a kindness in his way, I think, but to me it felt like being backed into a corner. So you ran." I preferred to think of it as choosing a different path. Theodore Whitmore's advertisement offered escape and the possibility of building a life on my own terms. Even marrying a stranger seemed preferable to marrying a man who made my skin crawl. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. "This business partner, did he hurt you? Beyond the threats about work, I mean." "No. He tried to kiss me once, and I slapped him hard enough that he never tried again. But the power he held over my future, that was its own kind of violence. I am sorry you went through that. No woman should have to choose between bad options like that. It worked out for the best, though. If he had not pushed me, I never would have answered Theodore's advertisement. And if I had not answered the advertisement, I never would have gotten off that train in Dry Creek, never would have met you. Funny how life works sometimes. The worst things lead us to the best things. Do you really think I am one of the best things?" The question came out more vulnerable than she intended. Ethan shifted closer to her on the rock, near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I know you are. These past weeks with you here, they have been the happiest I have had in longer than I can remember. The ranch feels like a home instead of just a place I work. I find myself looking forward to each day because I know you will be part of it." "I feel the same," Lydia confessed. "I wake up in the mornings excited instead of anxious. I go to bed at night content instead of worried." "You have given me that, Ethan. You and this place. Then stay, not just for the summer, stay permanently. Marry me and help me build the future I have been dreaming about." Her heart raced at the directness of the proposal. "Are you sure? We have known each other such a short time." "I am more sure of this than I have been of anything since I decided to leave Missouri and come west. I love you, Lydia Thompson. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing on that train platform looking lost and brave at the same time. I know it is fast, and I know it is probably crazy, but out here we do not have the luxury of long courtships and proper society rules. We have to trust our instincts and take our chances when they come." Lydia looked into his eyes, those gray-green eyes that had been the first thing she noticed about him, and saw nothing but sincerity and hope. She thought about the life he was offering, the partnership he was proposing. It was so different from what she had expected when she left Boston, but different did not mean wrong. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I did not plan to. I did not think I could fall in love so quickly, but here we are. So is that a yes? Will you marry me?" "Yes." "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Nelson." He let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses and pulled Lydia into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her toes curl in her boots. She kissed him back just as fiercely, pouring all her hope and fear and love into that kiss, feeling him do the same. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably head back and tell Maria and Miguel. Maria will want to start planning immediately." "Is there much to plan? I thought Western weddings were fairly simple affairs." "Simple, yes, but Maria will still want everything to be perfect. She has been hoping for this since the day you arrived." They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, or as close to hand in hand as they could manage while riding separate horses, and burst into the house with their news. Maria shrieked with delight and hugged Lydia tight enough to lift her off the ground. Miguel clapped Ethan on the back and declared they would need to throw a proper celebration. "When?" Maria demanded. "When will you marry?" Ethan looked at Lydia. "What do you think? We could go to Carson City tomorrow and find a preacher if you want. Or we could wait a few weeks and do it properly," Lydia suggested. "Give people time to gather, make it a real celebration." 3 weeks, Maria declared. "That gives me time to help you make a proper dress and get word out to the neighboring ranches. We will have the ceremony here, a big party with food and music and dancing." The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Maria proved to be as talented with a needle as she was with cooking, and together, she and Lydia created a wedding dress from fabric ordered from Carson City. A simple but elegant design in cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ethan threw himself into ranch work with renewed energy, wanting everything to be perfect for when Lydia officially became mistress of the property. He repaired fences, painted the barn, even built new furniture for their bedroom, a beautiful headboard he carved with intricate designs during the evenings while Lydia sewed. News of the wedding spread through the scattered ranching community, and neighbors Lydia had never met stopped by to offer congratulations and promises to attend. She was surprised by how welcoming everyone was, how ready they were to accept her as one of their own. The night before the wedding, Maria insisted that Lydia sleep in her and Miguel's quarters, maintaining the tradition that the bride and groom should not see each other the day of the wedding until the ceremony. Lydia lay awake for hours, too excited and nervous to sleep, thinking about how much her life had changed in just 2 months. She had come west as one man's mail-order bride and was about to become another man's wife by choice, by love. The difference between those two things felt enormous, like the difference between a cage and a wide open sky. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Maria and Miguel's wife helped Lydia dress, pinning up her hair and fastening the tiny buttons on her dress. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back, so different from the anxious, desperate person who had stepped off the train in Dry Creek. The ceremony was held in the yard in front of the ranch house, with a preacher brought in from Carson City officiating. Chairs had been arranged in neat rows, and neighbors filled them, dressed in their finest clothes. Wildflowers decorated every surface, and someone had strung lanterns in the trees for the dancing that would follow after dark. Miguel walked Lydia down the makeshift aisle, giving her away in place of the father she had lost. And there, at the end, waiting beside the preacher, stood Ethan in a new suit that made him look almost like a stranger until she saw his eyes and the love shining there. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, with traditional vows that took on deeper meaning when spoken here, in this wild and beautiful place, surrounded by people who had welcomed her so completely. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her with such tenderness that Lydia felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you, Mrs. Nelson," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too, Mr. Nelson." The celebration that followed was unlike anything Lydia had experienced in Boston. There was no formal receiving line or stiff propriety, just genuine joy and generous hospitality. Tables groaned under the weight of food everyone had contributed, and when the sun set and the lanterns were lit, someone produced a fiddle and the dancing began. Ethan proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, spinning Lydia around the makeshift dance floor with confidence and grace. "You have been holding out on me," she accused laughingly. "When did you learn to dance?" "My mother insisted all her children learn before we were allowed to attend socials. I have not had much occasion to practice out here, but I guess it is like riding. You never really forget." They danced until Lydia's feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. Then, as the party continued around them, Ethan took her hand and led her away from the noise and lights, into the quiet darkness of the house. Their bedroom had been transformed while they were occupied with the celebration. Candles cast a soft glow over the furniture Ethan had built, and the bed was made up with new linens, a wedding gift from Maria. Lydia felt suddenly shy, aware that they were truly married now, that this was their wedding night. "Are you nervous?" Ethan asked, closing the door behind them. "A little," she admitted. "Are you?" "Terrified," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "I want everything to be perfect for you. It already is perfect. You are perfect." He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "I want you to know something. We do not have to do anything you are not ready for. I can sleep in the other room if you would prefer. There is no rush." The offer was so sweet, so considerate, that Lydia fell in love with him all over again. "I do not want you to sleep in the other room. I want you here with me. I want to start our life together properly." "You are sure?" Instead of answering with words, she reached up and kissed him, trying to convey through that kiss everything she felt, all the love and trust and desire that had been building over these past weeks. He kissed her back with matching intensity, his hands coming up to cradle her face with infinite gentleness. What followed was tender and sweet and occasionally awkward in the way of first times, but it was perfect because it was them, because it was built on love and mutual respect. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Lydia's head on Ethan's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "No regrets?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Not a single one. You. Only that I did not meet you sooner. Think of all the time we could have had together." "We have all the time in the world now," Lydia said, tilting her head to kiss his jaw. "The rest of our lives." "The rest of our lives," he agreed. "I like the sound of that." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and when Lydia woke in the morning to find Ethan still beside her, she felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it, what she had hoped to find when she answered Theodore Whitmore's advertisement. Not wealth or status or even security, though those things mattered, but this sense of belonging, of being exactly where she was meant to be with exactly the right person. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. There were droughts that worried Ethan and illnesses that swept through the cattle. There were moments when Lydia missed the conveniences of city life, when she longed for a proper bookstore or a theater or even just neighbors close enough to visit without planning a half-day journey. But for every challenge, there were a dozen joys. The first time she successfully baked bread that did not turn out like a brick. The morning she discovered she was pregnant and saw Ethan's face light up with wonder. The quiet evenings on the porch watching the sun set over land that was theirs, truly theirs. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1876, delivered by Maria with Ethan pacing anxiously outside until he heard the baby's first cry. They named her Clara after Ethan's sister, and she had her father's gray-green eyes and her mother's dark hair. Ethan was instantly besotted, spending hours just watching Clara sleep, marveling at her tiny fingers and toes. "I never knew I could love someone so much so quickly," he told Lydia, cradling Clara against his chest with practiced ease. "Except with you, I suppose. You taught me about instant love." A son followed 2 years later, a robust boy they named James after Lydia's father. Then another daughter and another son, until the house Ethan had built anticipating a family was filled with the noise and chaos of children. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Lydia proving to have a head for numbers that helped them expand strategically and weather the economic ups and downs of the cattle business. Maria and Miguel remained on the ranch, becoming like family, with their own children playing alongside Ethan and Lydia's. Clara, Ethan's sister, visited from California with her growing family, and the two women became fast friends despite their limited time together. As the years passed, Dry Creek grew from a dusty waypoint to a proper town with a school, a church, and even a small library that Lydia helped establish. She became known in the community as someone who could be counted on for help, whether teaching children to read, nursing sick neighbors, or organizing social events that brought the scattered ranching families together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Lydia back to the high pasture where he had proposed, the place they thought of as theirs. The pool was the same, the cottonwoods perhaps a bit taller but otherwise unchanged. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked as they sat on their rock, older and more weathered but still finding comfort in each other's presence. Getting off that train in Dry Creek instead of going on to Virginia City. Everything that came after. Lydia looked at him, at the face she knew as well as her own now, the lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the gray starting to thread through his hair. Not for a single moment. Getting off at the wrong stop was the best mistake I ever made. "Not a mistake," Ethan corrected, pulling her close. "Fate, destiny, whatever you want to call it, you were meant to be here with me. I knew it the moment I saw you. And when you said I should stay anyway, best decision I ever made. Well, second best. The best was convincing you to marry me." She laughed and kissed him, tasting love and contentment and the promise of many more years together. The West had been everything she feared and nothing like she expected. It had been hard and lonely and sometimes frightening. But it had also given her Ethan, given her a family and a home and a life she would not trade for anything. 20 years after that first anniversary, Lydia stood on the porch of the ranch house watching her grandchildren play in the yard. Clara had married a rancher from the next county and had 3 children who visited often. James was running the daily operations of the ranch now, learning from his father the same way Ethan had learned by doing. The younger children were finding their own paths, some staying close to home, others venturing out to seek their fortunes elsewhere. Ethan emerged from the house and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood like that often these days, watching the life they had built continue to grow and flourish around them. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About trains and wrong stops and cowboys who suggest staying anyway," Lydia said, leaning back into his embrace. "About how strange and wonderful life can be. Any regrets after all these years? Only that we cannot live it all over again, experience it fresh. But then I remember we have grandchildren who will have their own adventures, their own unexpected loves, and that is almost as good. Better, even, because we get to watch from the comfort of our porch instead of living through all the fear and uncertainty." Lydia turned in his arms to face him properly. His hair was fully gray now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes were the same gray-green that had captivated her on that dusty train platform so many years ago. I would live through it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment of fear and uncertainty, every challenge and hardship. It was worth it to end up here with you. I love you, Lydia Nelson, more today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. That is terribly sentimental for a tough old rancher. You make me sentimental. Always have. They kissed there on the porch, a long, sweet kiss witnessed only by their grandchildren who were too busy playing to notice, and the wide Nevada sky that had seen countless such kisses over the years. When they finally parted, Ethan kept one arm around Lydia's waist, anchoring her to his side. "Do you remember what you told me that first day?" Lydia asked. "About the space out here, how some people find it lonely and others find it freeing." "I remember. You asked me which I found it, and you said both. Do you still feel that way?" Ethan considered the question, looking out over the land he had worked for decades, the home he had built with Lydia by his side. "No," he said finally. "I do not feel lonely anymore, and I have not in years. The space is still here, but it is filled now. Filled with family and memories and love." "You did that, Lydia. You took the loneliness away and gave me everything I did not even know I was missing." Tears pricked at Lydia's eyes. After all these years, he could still move her to tears with his words. "You did the same for me. I was so lost when I got off that train. Lost and scared and desperate. You gave me a place to belong. We gave each other that, built it together, piece by piece." One of their grandchildren called out then, begging for a story about the old days. Ethan and Lydia smiled at each other and moved to the porch chairs they had sat in countless evenings, ready to tell the tales that had become family legend. The story of the mail-order bride who got off at the wrong stop. The cowboy who said stay anyway. The love that grew from that unlikely beginning into something that sustained not just them, but generations. As the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Lydia Thompson Nelson looked around at everything she and Ethan had created and felt nothing but gratitude. Life had not turned out the way she planned. It had turned out better. The wrong stop had been the right one all along. And the cowboy who suggested she stay anyway had become the love of her life, her partner in all things, the person she would choose again and again through all the years that followed. Their story could have ended in tragedy, with Theodore Whitmore's death and Lydia stranded far from home. Instead, it became a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places, from chances taken and risks embraced. From getting off at the wrong stop and having the courage to stay anyway. Years later, when Lydia was in her 70s and Ethan not far behind, they would still take rides up to the high pasture on warm summer days. They moved slower now, their bones creaking in protest of the saddle, but the destination was worth any discomfort. They would sit by their pool under the cottonwood trees and remember all the times they had been there before. The proposal, the anniversaries, the quiet moments stolen from busy lives raising children and running a ranch. "I have been thinking," Ethan said on one such visit, "about what happens after, when one of us is gone and the other is left behind. Morbid thoughts for such a beautiful day. Maybe, but important ones. I want you to know that if I go first, I do not want you to grieve too long. You should live, really live, for as long as you are able. And if I go first, then I will follow not long after, I suspect. I'm not sure I remember how to live without you anymore." Lydia took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of decades of practice. "Let us not go anywhere for a good while yet. We have grandchildren to spoil and great-grandchildren on the way. The world still needs us. Agreed. Though I have to say, looking back on it all, I would not change a thing. Every moment, good and bad, led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be. Even the war, even all the hard times, even those, they shaped me into the man you fell in love with. Without them, maybe I would not have come west. Maybe I would not have been standing on that platform in Dry Creek the day your train stopped. Maybe we would have passed each other by like ships in the night. Fate would not have allowed that. We were meant to find each other. You really believe that? In fate and destiny and all that? Lydia smiled, squeezing his hand. I believe in us. I believe that sometimes two people are exactly right for each other, and if they are lucky enough to find each other despite the odds, that is worth believing in. Call it fate or destiny or simple good fortune. It does not matter. What matters is we found each other and we built something beautiful together. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind in the cottonwood leaves and the splash of water in the pool. The horses grazed nearby, old and gentle now, as devoted to each other as their riders were. Everything about this place spoke of continuity, of love that endured across decades. I have a confession, Lydia said eventually. I almost did not get off the train that day. When the conductor called for passengers to board after the water stop, I was halfway up the steps before I saw you and something made me pause. I never knew that. What made you pause? The look on your face. You seemed so serious, so determined. I thought you must have important news, and I was curious what could bring a cowboy to a train platform in the middle of nowhere with such purpose. If I had gotten on that train, if my curiosity had not won out, we would never have met. Then thank goodness for your curious nature. Thank goodness for you being there at all. Thank goodness for Theodore Whitmore, rest his soul, for bringing me west in the first place. Thank goodness for all the small moments and choices that led to us. Ethan pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. They were old now, their best years arguably behind them, but in moments like this, Lydia felt young again, felt like the nervous bride stepping off a train into an unknown future. The future had turned out better than any dream she might have conjured. The unknown had become the most precious known in her life. When they finally returned to the ranch that evening, tired but happy, they found the house full of family gathered for Sunday supper. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled every corner, their voices raised in conversation and laughter. Maria, now in her 80s but still sharp as a tack, sat in a place of honor at the table, regaling the younger generation with stories of the early days. Your grandmother showed up here with nothing but a trunk and a dream, Maria told the great-grandchildren. And your grandfather took one look at her and knew she was the one, told me so that very first night. Is that true, Granddad? One of the children asked. Did you really know right away? Ethan looked across the crowded table at Lydia, and their eyes met with the kind of understanding that comes only from a lifetime together. I knew she was special, he said. Knew I wanted the chance to know her better, to see if what I was feeling was real. Turned out to be more real than anything else in my life. That is so romantic, one of the granddaughters sighed. I want a love story like that. Then keep your heart open, Lydia advised. Love comes when you least expect it, often from the most unlikely places. The key is being brave enough to recognize it and wise enough to hold on to it once you do. Later that night, after everyone had gone to their own homes or been tucked into beds throughout the house, Ethan and Lydia lay together in the bed he had built for their wedding night so many years ago. The headboard he had carved was still beautiful, the wood polished smooth by decades of Lydia's hand running over it absently. You think they understand how lucky they are? Lydia asked. Our children and grandchildren growing up with all this love around them. Some do, some will eventually, some may never fully appreciate it until they have families of their own. But I think we have shown them what is possible when two people commit to building a life together. That is a legacy worth leaving. Along with the ranch and the family name and all the practical things. Those matter too, but the love matters more. Lydia turned to face him in the darkness, reaching out to trace the familiar contours of his face. I love you, Ethan Nelson. I have loved you from that first day in Dry Creek, and I will love you beyond my last breath. And I love you, Lydia Nelson. My mail-order bride who got off at the wrong stop, my wife who said yes when I asked her to stay, my partner in all things, my heart. They kissed, soft and sweet, and fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms the way they had done nearly every night for over 40 years. Outside, the Nevada wind sang through the sage and the stars blazed in their familiar patterns, and the ranch they had built together stood solid and enduring, a testament to what two people could create when they chose love over fear. The story that began with a wrong stop and a cowboy's invitation had become a legend in those parts, told and retold at gatherings and passed down through generations. The details changed sometimes in the telling, but the heart of it remained true. Love finds a way, even in the harsh landscape of the Wild West, even when plans fall apart and futures dissolve, even when all you have is faith and courage and the willingness to say yes to the unexpected. Lydia Thompson had boarded a train in Boston expecting to marry a stranger and found instead the love of her life. Ethan Nelson had gone to a train platform to deliver bad news and found the woman who would make his dreams of family and home come true. Together, they had built not just a ranch but a dynasty, not just a marriage but a love story that would inspire their descendants for generations. And it all started because a mail-order bride got off at the wrong stop, and a cowboy there said stay anyway. The rest, as they would tell anyone who asked, was the best kind of history. The kind written by two hearts that beat as one, by two lives that intertwined so completely they became inseparable, by love that started unexpectedly and lasted forever. When Lydia finally passed away at the age of 78, surrounded by family, Ethan held her hand and whispered all the things he had told her countless times before, that she was his everything, that loving her had been the greatest privilege of his life, that he would see her again soon on the other side. True to his word, he followed her just 6 months later, dying peacefully in his sleep in the bed they had shared for over 5 decades. The ranch continued under James's capable management, then passed to his children and their children after that. The house remained much as Ethan and Lydia had left it, a shrine to their love and the life they had built. And every year on the anniversary of their wedding, the family would gather to tell the story again, keeping it alive for new generations who needed to hear that love was real, that courage was rewarded, that getting off at the wrong stop could lead to exactly the right destination. In the end, Lydia Thompson and Ethan Nelson proved that the greatest adventures do not always come from careful planning. Sometimes they come from chance encounters and brave choices, from wrong stops that turn out to be right, from strangers who become everything, from a simple invitation to stay that blossoms into a lifetime of love. Their story was not unique in the broad strokes. The West was full of mail-order brides and lonely ranchers, of chance meetings and quick courtships. But the particulars of their love, the specific way they fit together and built a life that mattered, that was entirely their own. And it proved that even in the hardest places, even in times of uncertainty and loss, love could not only survive but thrive, creating beauty and meaning and legacy that echoed through the ages. The mail-order bride who got off at the wrong stop found her home. The cowboy who said stay anyway found his heart. And together, they found everything worth finding: love, family, purpose, and a happiness that lasted not just until death but beyond it, living on in the hearts and memories of everyone their love had touched.